My father was a trader. He traveled the world. He traveled every corner of the world, and I watched him do it. And he used to come home, and we used to talk about whether the world, as it got smaller, would fulfill its promise. And the promise was logical, that if the world got smaller, it would become more coherent. And he always swore that it wouldn't. It never would. That north and south and east and west, and men and women, and young and old, and people of all different faiths would remain as incoherent as ever. Part of his theory was that there were going to be too many people who followed him, and that the leaders of the world would become increasingly the flying dead. He used to talk about the flying dead a lot. People who fly around the world and who land for a day or a week or a month or a year or an hour in a place, and they're expected to deliver in it, and they have not got a clue what's going on around them. It was a pretty miserable version of the world. And I became increasingly interested in the idea that we all needed cultural intelligence, or CQ. Cultural intelligence, to me, is the ability to cross borders and boundaries between different cultures and actually thrive in so doing, love doing it, and never want to not do it. I think the world won't change that much. When I started out, everybody kept on telling me that IQ was the secret to everything. You had to be jolly clever and pass every test that was ever thrown at you, and IQ was utterly crucial. And if I had a penny for all the idiots over the years who've said to me, if you could just take the people out of this problem, Julia, there would be no problem, and you think, what an idiot. I mean, just breathtaking. But fortunately, EQ came around, emotional intelligence. It wasn't too great for those of us who are women, because we were all supposed to be terribly good at it, but we'll miss that point out. But EQ began to take on, and people realized that there were things called human beings in this, and that on the whole it would be a good thing if leaders had a bit of EQ. Unfortunately, you then began to get people who say, I'm very good with people. And then they would forget those two extra words that need to go after it, which is like me. And I think increasingly you're now beginning to see people who know that you need CQ, the ability to work with people and lead people who are not like you. Crucial. I think we'll carry on appointing people for IQ because no one's got the imagination to break away from it. We'll carry on, sadly, sacking some people a few years later for a total absence of EQ, but I believe that in future we will be promoting people for cultural intelligence. So for a long period of time, I wandered around, became one of the flying dead myself, and went around the world trying to talk to people who I thought had more cultural intelligence than most. And it seemed to me that there was something very clear that most of them had in common, which was that they'd sort of figured out which bits of them was core and which bits of them were flex. Which bits of them were core? And when I say bits, I mean your behaviors, I mean your values, I mean your beliefs, just about everything that you've got in there. Which bits are absolutely core, and without them, you ain't you? Which bits are core and absolutely crucial that you are incredibly inflexible about them? And the more inflexible you are about them, the more people trust you. And then there's this huge area called your flex, which is just about everything else. And the more flexible you are on that, the more people trust you. The first one, that someone was talking to me about being a salesman and how difficult it is to be a salesman. That actually you become so flexible on just about everything that you lose any sense whatsoever of having a core, and no one trusts you at all because they have no idea at what point you'd stop. Yeah? And the next one, the purple, that's my grandparents. Yeah? They came from the northwest of England, and everybody in their street was like them, and there was absolutely no need for them to adapt to anybody, and frankly, everybody else could adapt to them. And in fact, that little green slice at the end is just me being kind to them. There really wasn't anything there. That was them, and that was them, and that was them, and they were all caught, and I wouldn't trust them further than I could throw them. I believe that cultural intelligence comes on the sort of line between the two, between core and flex. That's where it lies, and it moves. It moves with great care, but it moves because it's called life. You learn more things, you meet more people, you move it. Someone pointed out to me, that one, my children drew that one, big load of core at the beginning because you get it from your parents and you nick it. And then quite importantly, it's go quite significantly down when you become a teenager and you'll do just about anything. And that helps you to figure out what your flex and your core is. And then towards the end, it starts creeping. I'm 56 now, it's creeping up. I'm getting much more intolerant of everybody. And you have to keep it down. A story, some years ago, did some work, or was invited to do some work in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this because everybody told me I had to wear an abaya. And I thought about it a lot, and I have 3 daughters who were deeply horrified that I was even thinking about it, given what I was supposed to be about and all my life and my belief in women, and how could you even consider this? And I thought about it a lot, and in the end came to the conclusion that actually what I wear is in my flex. I've never much cared about what I wear or what I look like. And therefore I would wear an abaya, and I went to Jeddah and I did the work there, and I learnt a lot. Because you do, discovered that I'd always thought that any woman who wore an abaya must be a wimp. And I learned how stupid I was. Extraordinary experience, but the interesting thing was coming back to London. People saying, typical. They demand that you wear an abaya when you go to Jeddah, but when they come to London, will they wear Western clothes? Well, actually, in this context, it's a perfectly stupid question. Because to the women I met in Jeddah, what you wear is in your core, and what I wear is in my flex. And I found it increasingly something that helped me begin to understand the world. But as you went on, you needed the braveness to then look at the next ones, the knots. Because as you do test your purple, as you do test your core, as you do meet new people, if you're like me, you discover little bits in your core that you're not very proud of, that aren't based on judgment, they're based on prejudgment. If you think you haven't got any knots, I'd like to suggest you're probably not human and probably kidding yourself. We all have knots in our core, and it seems to me that as you discover them and you dust them down and you find them curious and you work on them, you can either move them to your flex, or if you absolutely can't because they're so deep inside you, then at least make them your problem, not anybody else's. It helped me. I remember years ago going to speak to a group, about 100 businesswomen from the US. And as usual, I was late. We have many things in common. I was late, and I was rushing for the train, knowing I was late. And as I was jumping on the train at Liverpool Street, I fell, and I ripped my trousers. And so I got on the train, got there as fast as I could, rushed when I got to, it was in Cambridge, I rushed across, and I rushed onto the platform, and I started talking to this extraordinary group of about 100 businesswomen from the US. And about 2 minutes in, I suddenly said, hang on, let's just stop. Because none of you are listening to a word I'm saying, you're only looking at my knee. And I understand that you're looking at my knee, but I need you to be really clear. My values, my core says that if I say I'm going to be here to speak, I will make it under whatever circumstances, holding my trousers or not. We never finished the speech. We had the most wonderful conversation. And I discovered to what extent, what they really said to me is if we did what you're doing now, Julia, it would be the end of our careers, however good we were. And I think that a lot of cultural intelligence is unpicking your knots and having those brave conversations that on the whole you would prefer not to have. There's something curious about cultural intelligence, and it's a sort of paradox that you only really develop cultural intelligence if you, sir, decide to give it me. I can only really figure out what's going if you will reveal things to me. And the paradox is, of course, that you'll only reveal things to me if you think I have enough cultural intelligence to receive them. And I think that cultural intelligence is deep-rooted in an interest in other human beings, and such a deep interest in other human beings that you will not judge them with yourself as the benchmark. I think it comes from a determination to unpick the knots and to keep going and to keep on making a fool of yourself, because boy, do you make a fool of yourself, and to get into the habit of apologizing freely. I think it comes from the ability to remember that flex, if you're going to flex, then flex. It is extraordinary how quickly things get sclerotic. Is that a word? I don't know. They begin to just tighten up. And you say, but that's your flex, so flex it. And I think the last one, actually, is that you'll probably trust that I have some cultural intelligence if you occasionally observe me standing up in the presence of the opposite of cultural intelligence, which is cultural intolerance. And in those moments when it would be easier to say nothing, on the whole, it's better to say something, even if you make a bit of an idiot of yourself. But in the end, the thing that fascinated me was that the more I talked about cultural intelligence with people, the more I realized everybody assumes that cultural intelligence comes from understanding other people's cultures. And the further I went, the more I began to realize that there was one most difficult culture of them all to crunch, which is your own. That's the culture you really have to understand. Understand when it helps you, and understand when it hinders you. Understand when it opens things up for you, when it closes it down, when it causes other people's problems, when it gives you knots, and when it misses you opportunities. So ultimately, cultural intelligence fascinates me. I think people will be promoted for it because the world does require us to cope in a smaller but more complex world. I think it gives us a hope of being those kinds of leaders who do make the world more coherent. And I think it also gives us the hope of being, I want to be a leader because I want to change things. I know there are some leaders who want to keep things the same, but I want to change things. And I think cultural intelligence will help you to produce the change that you dream of producing.